Hello and welcome to this episode of the Peony Podcast. My name is Jack Jacob and I am your host. In this episode, I speak with Lisa Kelly, who's the Chief Operating Officer from Nottingham University Hospital's NHS Trust. Lisa was raised in a small village in South Derbyshire where she attended a local village school and grew up as a self-professed teacher's pet. Her leadership qualities showed themselves early. In her preschool nativity play, she played Mary and had a tendency to boss her schoolmates around. At university, Lisa studied geography, which involved a lot of human geography and international relations, furthering her interest in people and social aspects of healthcare, which was sparked by a school trip to Ethiopia when she was 16. To this day, in her current role, she still manages a partnership with a hospital in Ethiopia. As a leader, Lisa emphasises the building of relationships and connections, recognising the value of every team member's contributions and understanding what they bring to the table and how they can make the best use of that. Please do enjoy this episode as we get to know the person behind the job title. This episode of the Peony Podcast is sponsored by the Virtual HPN Expo. The Virtual HPN Expo will be taking place across the 17th and 18th of November on a state-of-the-art virtual events platform. The event will be CPD accredited and will host over 1,000 delegates across the 2 days. There'll be 40 exhibitors, 80 speakers addressing one main auditorium room and 4 breakout theatres, with the exhibitors being hosted across 4 exhibition zones. There'll be key themes around health inequalities, diversity and inclusion, workforce and well-being, AI and RPA, telehealth and virtual care, and improvement and innovation. We'll also be touching upon culture and leadership. To register as a delegate or to inquire about exhibiting, please visit our website, which is www.virtualhpnexpo.com. Lisa, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's a pleasure to interview you today.
You're welcome. Very lovely to be here.
Good. So, as you know,
be kind because this is my first time doing a podcast. So.
Is it? There we go. I'll only throw 3 or 4 curveball questions in there. Usually I do about 10. So no, joking. So as you know, the podcast is all around you as a person. It starts with the person behind the job title. So I think an opportunity for my audience in terms of the podcast audience in the sector and hopefully some of your colleagues and friends to find out a little bit more about you and who you really are and not just the you as a COO but you as a person. So let's start with your childhood really. So whereabouts did you grow up?
So I grew up in a little village called Findon in South Derbyshire, and it's about 10 minutes away from where I live now actually. But if you'd have asked me when I was growing up would I imagine myself living here in the future or when I'm an adult, I definitely would have said no. Very small village. My gran lived close by, my auntie and uncle, my cousins. I could never get away with anything. So so I kind of surprised myself actually ending up back here, but I love it now. So
home calls, eh?
Yeah.
Was it like a village where everyone knew each other? It was like kind of that small. Yeah.
Yeah, we went to the local village school and really lovely actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, good. And so and in kind of school, was you academic? Was you one of the top of the class?
So I think I'm just trying to remember actually. I remember one teacher at a parents' evening saying to my mum, "Lisa might not be the brightest people in the class, but she tries really hard."
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I was probably a bit of a teacher's pet actually as well. So I definitely tried hard. I was never going to get straight A's and everything, but I did okay.
Yeah,
I think. Yeah,
makes sense. And obviously, like you're in a very senior leadership role. Do you feel that you always kind of had those leadership qualities in you? Did you show them when you was growing up?
Well, in the preschool nativity, I played Mary.
Yeah.
And I think my teachers and my school friends would probably have said I was quite bossy as a child. So potentially, but I don't know that anyone grows up wanting to be an NHS manager. So I don't think I had any concept of this would be the career I would be in when I was young.
Of course. I think when you're that age, and actually probably to to even, into early adulthood, you probably don't realize the structures that exist in organizations, right? You think if you work for the NHS, you're either, a doctor, nurse, or a cleaner or something like that, right? And you don't realize that there's, those tiers.
Yeah, and there's still quite a belief, I think. Now I come across people, and when they say, what do you do? And I say, I work in the NHS, they assume that you're clinical.
Yeah.
And even holding a leadership role, when I explain maybe first that my title, people often assume that you've got a clinical background. So
yeah. Like as in like an operating theatre rather than operations.
Yes, or just that in order to hold a very senior leadership position in a hospital, you must have come up through a clinical route. I think that's, I found that to be a bit of a common misconception.
Yeah. Well, I'll come on to a second about your role, because I want to ask you how you would describe your role. But before we get there, what did you do at university then?
I studied geography, my first degree. I was at the University of Manchester.
Yeah. And then did you do another?
Well, so lots of human. I was just gonna say, people start going geography to health. How does that work? But there's a stronger connection than might first appear. So, a lot of human geography and a lot of international development elements of that module. In fact, I even did a module, something like social constructions of health and disease, so a bit of sociology and anthropology. So it's not quite as kind of, I wasn't wading in rivers and climbing volcanoes. So very human side geography. And then, yes, after I studied at Manchester, I went on to do the NHS Graduate Management Training Scheme, and through that I did a Master's in Health and Leadership.
Okay.
Jointly awarded actually between the University of Manchester and the University of Birmingham.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. So how did you find out about that national programme then? Because it's, is it something like, I might be completely making this up, but like 4 out of 5 execs go through that program, or chief execs maybe? I've made that up, to be honest.
No, I think the last handful of the previous chief execs of the NHS, so sitting at the Department of Health, NHS England, have happened to have been through the NHS Graduate Management Training Scheme, but I'm not sure that would apply, across all of the executive teams in the NHS.
Yeah.
So in all honesty, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do after university, and I applied for a handful of things. Probably the most life-forming thing I did at the age of 16 was I went to Ethiopia. We had quite a maverick school teacher who managed to convince the head teacher and our parents that a school trip to Ethiopia was the thing to do. And that really had such an impact on my life, and I didn't quite know what I wanted to do, but I knew that I wanted to try and make a difference, to sound really twee, in some way or another. So when I was looking at what to do after university, or whilst I was at university, I did my dissertation, I went back to Addis, and I found a reason to go back there to go and do my undergraduate research. But when I was leaving, I knew I wanted to work in the public sector, but third sector, but wasn't quite sure.
Talk to me about that trip in Ethiopia before we move on. So why did it have such an impact on you?
So I grew up in a single parent family on a council estate, nice upbringing, but we didn't have a huge amount of spare cash, and I'd never had the opportunity to travel really as a young person, and so to have that chance through school to go to Ethiopia was massive. It was the other side of the world, an entirely different world actually in some respects. And I think it was so profound in that I couldn't believe that people, only an 8-hour flight away, that the way that other people in the world lived and experienced life, and it made me really value what I had and appreciate what I had and put things into perspective, I think.
What, just around kind of poverty and just how kind of fortunate we are to
absolutely.
have been born in a country that is developed and stuff.
But by accident of birth, I was born in the UK, and friends that I'm still in touch with now, actually, from all those years ago, they were born in Ethiopia and had the life that they had. Now, don't get me wrong, some of the research I did was around social capital and actually how incredibly happy people can be with much less than we have, and maybe a lot more to complain about. So I don't want to paint a huge but it had such I kind of thought, God, life isn't fair, and I don't know what it is, but I would like to be able to make it slightly more fair. I'd like to be able to to make a difference? Why is it that by the age of 16, you know, I'd been through education, it just looked like I had had so many more opportunities compared to some of the other young people I was meeting when I was there.
Yeah, makes sense. And so what did you do? Did you go out there and volunteer and help out and stuff, or did you just go and visit the country?
We ran a bit of a play scheme for kids. So it's like the summer holidays. We had kind of 4 weeks of taking a group of children from about the age of 3 to 15, in one of the Cabellis in one of the shanty areas, and we basically ran like a kind of play scheme for them. And then we got involved and we visited other projects and things whilst we were there too.
Yeah, very nice, very nice. And so, so you was talking about your degree, and obviously, so you say you went back out there to do some research.
Yeah, so I think I kind of maybe partly chose that degree as well because I knew that would be a route to get back out there. So I think that was part of, you know, what can I do and how can I shape it to go back. So my school continued to go for many years. My year was the first year, and so I timed it so I was going back out to support other students that were going, get involved in the same project, but then carry out some qualitative research around social capital, which is the concept that, you know, we might not be exchanging cash, but if I'm a plumber and you're a builder, I'll come and put a toilet in and you come and build the bricks to make my house. And, you know, how do we trade things in different ways? Okay. And how do we find out knowledge and intelligence about what's going on and where are the best bananas to buy or whatever that might be. But yeah, definitely a framework for me to go back, and it's something that I feel very passionately about and has stayed with me throughout my career in very beautiful full circle. Now, as I sit here in my role at NUH, I am also the executive director lead for our hospital partnership with a hospital in Jimma, which is just outside of Addis in Ethiopia. Okay. So the partnership has been running for 26 years between NUH and Jimma. So it's an absolute privilege to kind of have an opportunity to get back involved and take a leadership role in that. So I was just out in Jimma in November, and I went back to the same shanty areas in Addis that I'd been, and I met some of the young people I taught who have now got kids themselves, which is really lovely.
I bet it's a real nice experience to see, and a very humbling experience, no doubt. And so you've you know, I was doing a bit of research. Obviously, you've been about in Zambia as well, and worked in a university teaching hospital out there.
So after the graduate scheme, I worked for my first few years in Burton Hospital, which is just over the border from the East Midlands into the West Midlands. Yeah. And whilst I was there, I came across a really unique opportunity that's still running, called NHS Improving Global Health Through Leadership Development. It's quite a long title, so IGH for short. So an NHS seconded opportunity, and they work in various parts of the world. I'm now an advisor on their board. So there's a program that's been running in Cambodia for over a decade, Zambia, South Africa. We've had partnerships in Tanzania and Kenya and other places. And the idea is that you have some skills that are useful, that you take them abroad and you share them and hopefully make some sustainable changes, but you also learn and develop whilst you're there. And so you then bring those skills back to the NHS. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely amazing.
What was your learning? What did you take away from it?
So I ended up being there for a year. So I extended it for a year. And I worked with the anaesthesia department. So in Zambia, the majority of anaesthetics are given by our equivalent to a healthcare support worker, and it wasn't a particularly medicalised specialism. So it wasn't recognised by the university, it wasn't being taught. And
as in the people that put people out for operations?
Yeah.
And that wasn't being done by the equivalent of a healthcare assistant?
No, so there's probably 3 or 4 trained physicians, doctors, anaesthetists in the whole country.
Oh wow!
So a few years ago, when Nigel Crisp, I can't remember exactly what year it was now, maybe 2004 or 6. Nigel Crisp was a previous chief exec of the NHS. When he stood down from his national role, he spent a bit of time meeting health ministers around the world and kind of saying, how can we help? And one of the areas, so the Zambian health minister at the time got in touch and said, yeah, there's a few areas we'd really like some support with, one of which was anaesthesia. And so a group of people got together and set up an academic training program. So there is now, and it's been running ever since, there is now a training program through the University of Lusaka, through the University Teaching Hospital there, to train Zambian anaesthetists. When I arrived I was there in 2012, and when I got there, the academic part of the program was going really well, but the hospital wasn't functioning as well as it might. So they didn't have the right drugs in theatre to be able to train people, for example. So my job was to try and bring some of my hospital management skills to strengthen the department and get it more established.
Yeah.
When I got there, they weren't quite sure what to do with me, because there isn't the concept of a professional healthcare manager in Zambia. You get your leadership position by being kind of the longest serving clinician, doctor.
Like what we spoke about previously.
Yeah. And so it took me a long time to sort of earn respect and build relationships, and for people to understand what value I could bring.
Yeah.
And I'd say that is something that has stayed with me in my career in the NHS, that actually that's how the world goes around. It is about building relationships and building mutual respect and understanding and valuing each other's contributions, and understanding what people bring to the table and how you make the best use of that. So I think that's definitely something, but also being really creative. So, some of the financial challenges we feel like we have in the NHS, which of course we do, we never have enough resources for everything we'd like to provide. Yeah. But again, setting that context and perspective in an environment where they really don't have the very basics to deliver safe healthcare often.
Yeah, no, it makes, like you say, it just puts things into perspective, and you think, actually it could be worse. There's always workarounds, right? And I suppose, if it was terrible, every trust would be in a deficit, and there is trusts that are in surplus, there is trusts that are in deficits, and I suppose it's just that creative leadership, finding creative ways of doing things, and kind of finding those opportunities. So actually, this kind of leads on nicely to one thing I was going to talk about. So you talked about there about, because your background, because you weren't a senior clinician, and that, posed a challenge in kind of building credibility, building respect, and so on. Obviously, and we spoke before about this, but, obviously you're a young chief operating officer, and you've been in leadership positions for a number of years now, and has that ever posed a challenge, your age in building credibility, or people respecting you and valuing your opinion and thoughts and so on?
You're being very polite, Jack. So yeah, I am 34, and I definitely wouldn't have imagined 10 years ago that I would be in this role at the age of 34. Yeah. Maybe a few years ago. So there's something about right place, right time, hopefully right value and attitude. I've had a lot of people support me in my career. I feel really lucky. People have maybe taken a chance on me, have recognised that I've got potential and drive, and maybe sometimes taken a bit of a risk on me in terms of appointing me to positions where perhaps they could have chosen a candidate that had got decades more experience than me. So I feel very fortunate for that. Yes, it does, but it usually doesn't last very long in terms of people are quite forward. A lot of the time people will comment, or they will ask me the question.
What will ask you how old you are directly?
Yeah. So I remember early on, a few years ago now, but being on call and needing to go into the hospital and turning up. I'd been in town, so turning up with my jeans and my Ugg boots on, and people sort of looking past me, being like, "Yeah, but who's the real on-call manager or on-call director? It can't possibly be you." So I've had a little bit of that, and I think definitely. Particularly, I think one of the challenges with working in multidisciplinary teams, if you're a consultant, you have usually worked in that organisation for a long time, or you intend to. There's a bit of mobility in the consultant workforce. You might relocate for a reason, but quite often a consultant chooses an organisation for life, and they will stay for a very long period of time. The management career is quite different to that, and actually, I don't think it would be healthy for me to stay in this role for 10 years or 20 years. For me, it's much more of a relay race, and I'm holding the baton, and I have the privilege of sitting in this chair now, and I will give the best I can for a period of time. But then it'll be time for someone else to come in, and who'll have a different set of skills and be better at me, at things than I've been. And so I think our careers kind of rub up against each other sometimes, and I think just as a manager generally, age, younger or older, you have to really work and earn that credibility from a clinical team to know that you're going to stick around long enough to make a difference, to demonstrate you've got the same value set. So actually, sometimes people think, oh, she's the manager, all she cares about is the budgets and the processes, and actually I get out of bed every morning because I really want to make a difference to patients, and I really want to support the clinical and non-clinical teams here at NUH to deliver the best possible patient care.
Yeah,
and that means looking after and supporting them.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's not just for age, but where it has been, or where people have questioned it, or where I felt like people might be worried about that. For me, it's about delivery. So it doesn't last long, and people soon forget that once you do what you say you're going to do.
Yeah.
Once you demonstrate your credibility, once you earn respect, once you show interest, and you are authentic in how you approach things. I never walk into a situation and pretend I know it all. I might be the chief operating officer anyway. I still have a lot to learn, and I hope I'm always saying that. I don't think you've ever been learning, and I think having, being a little bit humble and sort of recognizing that, allowing yourself to be a little bit vulnerable, which probably wasn't very fashionable years ago in leadership. Now I hope that that's how I build my.
It's authentic leadership, isn't it? Right? For anyone to act, think, pretend they know everything it's impossible. And that's why you've got consultants, or you've got specialists in certain areas, because for that reason. Could they do what you do? No chance. But could you do what they do? No chance. And it's about complementing skill sets.
Part of that role is about facilitating, bringing the right people together, supporting them, trying to recognizing what everyone brings to the table, and we all bring something different.
Yeah, of course. So you talk about values a lot as well. What are your values?
So integrity and authenticity are definitely really important to me. Kind of altruism, so the whole kind of how do we leave the world a better place than we found it, and how do we leave a role a better place than we found it, or an organisation.
That's weird that you said so. I worked for when I first started in my career, for a recruitment business, and there was a lady that had been there for a number of years, and she left, and the chief executive at the time said you can always see if someone's done a good job or not. Is the place better as they're leaving than when they arrived? And it's always stuck with me, that actually. And it's thought, right, have you, or have I, or have someone that's leaving this organization or whatever, is the organization better since they've been here? And that shows a good kind of tenureship, doesn't it?
Yeah, and sometimes that's quite hard in a black and white perspective in a chief operating officer role, because we're often measured on performance targets that are rag rated, and they're either red or they're green. You're either delivering or you're not. And increasingly, over my time in the NHS, those targets have become increasingly difficult to deliver, and not least since COVID. We are not delivering the access to care in a timely way, in the way we would like to, across a lot of areas at the moment. And so you have to dig deep, and you have to think about different ways of how you add value. It's not just always about those bits. It's about how you treat people. It's about how you help people to do their job. There's different ways of measuring success, and I think remembering that in these roles is really important. Yeah, no,
absolutely. So talk to me about your current role then. So how would you describe your chief operating officer role?
So if someone asks what does it mean, I will often say to them, my job is to help the clinicians to deliver high quality patient care. So my job is to support and help and lead others to run the hospital.
Yeah.
On a day-to-day basis, my responsibility is the running of the hospital.
Yeah.
So, obviously the book stops with the chief executive of an organisation, but often her role is a bit more of an outward-facing one. So working with our system partners, working at a regional, and informing and contributing at a national level. So the day-to-day running and organising of the hospital sits with the chief operating officer.
Yeah.
Obviously, alongside a huge amount of support from the rest of my executive colleagues, my medical director, my nursing director, and others as well.
Of course.
No day is the same. It's really diverse. You could work all 24 hours in the day and your job would still not feel like it was done.
Yeah. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with that mentally? Because, you know, like, I suppose, you know, like in sales, like in leadership, like in, you know, there's no end to this, is there? You know, you could always do something. So how do you feel like you've accomplished things every day, or do you have to reflect on that and say, right, what have I actually done today? How do you deal with that?
So there's something for me about wanting to model the right behaviour, and I think that helps me keep my own balance. So if my managers or aspiring chief operating officers look at me and think, bloody hell, she looks knackered and exhausted and she's grumpy and, you know, she's always in the office, that job just looks horrendous, no one will ever want to follow me and do this. And so that helps me have a bit of a conscience, and I often talk to my teams about the importance of work-life balance, that when you're doing a leadership role like this, you can't compartmentalize your life, or at least I struggle to do that. Some people are better than others, but actually when you turn up at work, what's going on at home, what happened in the car on the way here, what you're doing tonight is all part of who you are and what you bring to the table. And so I think recognizing that work-life balance that's really important for me, and I really encourage that. And I recognize that I can't do that if I don't do that for myself and I don't look after myself. I don't think you can work ridiculously long hours and be productive for that whole time. You can exist, you can be, I can be here, but actually I'm really doing my best work. And so I try to make sure that I have hobbies and have a life outside of work. It will make me come back the next day. So last night I was doing some yoga, and hopefully that makes me come back into work this morning slightly fresher than I might have been if I'd been up working all night. So I think it's hard. I mean, you know, I don't, some people, I think you want to be a certain type of person to want to be a chief operating officer. Sometimes people look at me and think I'm a bit mad, but it's hugely rewarding. You know, when you see things progress and move forward, and you see people develop and teams develop, and you see us achieve things for our patients, it's incredibly rewarding to have been a small part of that.
Yeah,
it's challenging, and so you have to have a bit of discipline. You have to surround yourself by great people. So having really good support around you is really important.
In terms of outside of work?
Both. Yeah. So specifically talking about in work there. So, you know, whether that's your admin support, whether that's your deputy, whether that's, you know, my general managers or my clinical leaders, but the team around you, I think, is so important to you. But also, outside of work, having, you know, making sure you can switch off. So for example, tonight I'm going paddleboarding. I've got a really lovely group of friends that I do that with now. It's great to not talk about the NHS or COVID and just, you know.
Yeah, so we haven't spoke about COVID yet. I'm sure I'll come on to it.
No, it's all about balance for me.
Yeah.
And we've got, you know, you have to, there's quite an incredible burnout, I think, of chief operating officers. And I think, you know, if you've got to play the long game, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And so I have to manage my own expectations about what I want to achieve. I've been in this post now just over a year, and there are things I wanted to do in the first 3 months that I've still not got around to doing. And you have to kind of, you know, I guess, be kind to yourself a bit. Yeah, makes sense.
So in terms of that role from your, you know, from the roles before you were a COO, what's that step up been like for you in terms of workload, pressure, responsibility? Is it, you know, like a Grand Canyon jump, you know, is it a big gap?
I think it's all relative, actually.
Right.
You know, I don't think mine is necessarily the hardest job in the organisation. I think the general manager's jobs actually are some of the most difficult challenging jobs in organisations. So I think it's all relative. On day one of the graduate management training scheme, here's me being vulnerable now. When I got the letter through to say where I was going to be, it said ENT, and I had to Google what ENT stood for, because I fortunately never had to go to a hospital for an ear, nose or throat appointment, and so I didn't realise what department that was. But on day one in that job, that I was managing a group of secretaries. I was you know, you're given a huge amount of responsibility on that scheme, and so that was hugely challenging. You know,
and that was straight out the national management program, did you say?
Yeah, so I'd been to university. I'd taken a year out to do some travelling, and on the 1st of September I start the management training scheme. But you start with a job title. You walk into the hospital on that day one, and you're concurrently learning as you go. You're kind of training on the job, and there's academic things that support it along the way. But so that's a massive.
I was going to say that must have been
job. And the secretaries were at least twice my age, and did not give me an easy ride. They were some of the most challenging people I've ever had to try and lead and manage. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I think it's all relative wherever you are in your career journey. And I have moved quite quickly through my career, and so I have probably never sat incredibly comfortable year after year in the same role. I've been moving and learning quite a lot, and so you're kind of constantly then on this sort of upward learning spike, I suppose. So
yeah
I think there is a big difference between being in a board level role and a non-board level role. For me, there is quite a significant difference. You have a responsibility. So not only do I have my portfolio of responsibility as Chief Operating Officer, but I also have a corporate responsibility of taking the decisions, with the rest of my colleagues about the direction of the organisation that might be out with my immediate portfolio. So, and the other thing I think is probably the politics with the small p, some of the kind of inter-system regions, some of the national part of my role, I think, is to help interpret some of that, to help make it meaningful for the organisation, to challenge it where I don't think it's appropriate, or where I'm not quite sure the direction we're getting externally is right for our organisation and our patients. And some of that stuff is that's a kind of, you're continuously learning to develop.
Yeah, makes sense. Talk to me about some of the leaders that you've worked with then, because you said about, people that have, been good to you ultimately and taken risks and that kind of stuff. So what, is there any particular people that have really stayed with you and you kind of are really grateful for them being in your life, in fact, not just career, but in your life?
Yeah, definitely. So again, one of the amazing things about the management training scheme is you're exposed to some really senior leaders across the NHS, both locally but also nationally, very early on. And I now try to give back. So I will now go onto those kind of day one induction programs, or as part of the recruitment process for the next generation of management training, because I recognise that people gave their time up. And so yes, there's absolutely people that are still part of my network that I still pick up the phone to and go, I'm having a tough day. Got any thoughts? Can I talk through something with you? So incredibly grateful for that, and for offering opportunities and development and kind of coaching me through things. Yes, it continues to be a really important part of my network and a part of my resilience, I think, in terms of this role. And you collect them as you go along in your career. So, I'm still in contact with people from when I worked in London or when I worked in Coventry, and hopefully we support each other, because actually the challenges we are facing are much the same, and you don't need to keep reinventing the wheel all the time. Actually, someone will either be going through it or will have gone through it, something similar. Yeah,
makes sense. And what? So I've asked you about your values and you said about integrity and authenticity and that kind of stuff. Would you say that they very much kind of dovetail into your leadership style? Actually, I'll ask that question. What is your leadership style, would you say?
So I think it's really important to be a visible leader. So I try to get out and about in the organisation. So yesterday, for example, we have a community paediatrics team, and yesterday I went out to one of the 12 health centres that our teams work out of. And last Friday I was in the Children's Hospital, and I will go and visit ED this evening before I go. And so I think getting out and about in the organisation and teams seeing you when things are going well, really important, and when things are not going so well, to be shoulder to shoulder. So if I think about last winter or COVID, some of the most challenging times of my career, and definitely not having all the answers, but being shoulder to shoulder, or socially distanced where appropriate, but looking in the whites of people's eyes and knowing that actually we might not have all the answers, but we're going to stick it out together and we're going to work out what we need to do. We're going to find through this together. I think that's really, really important, and people remember that. People will remember how you made them feel, So that's really important. I just think listening is incredibly important. The organisation here is huge, 17,000 people. You can never communicate enough. So trying to make sure that people feel like they know what's going on in the organisation, but also that they're at the heart of shaping it. I had the privilege when I was at Coventry to University Hospitals Coventry, Warwickshire was partnershipped with the Virginia Mason Hospital in Seattle in the States for 5 years as part of an NHS formal partnership, and it was all about using quality improvements to help make the hospital be the safest it could. And I learned some really key things there about the people who are doing the work know the work best. They know how to make it better. They're the people you need to get engaged in improving it. I don't know. So getting the right people around a problem and letting the people who do the work really shape what happens with it, I think is really important.
And kind of enabling that to be facilitated and
celebrating success. So my general managers would tell you that I make them, which is not a comfortable thing. We often don't like doing it. I don't know if it's not necessarily an NHS thing, it's probably a British thing, but I often encourage them at the end of a meeting to say, right, well, one thing's gone well this week. What's gone well? Because we often spend a lot of time talking about the things we're not getting right and how we can improve, and that's right. But also taking time to celebrate when things are going well. It's really important.
Yeah. So I've got a mentor and kind of a coach and stuff that I work with, and he always says, what's the challenges, so on and so forth, and then he always goes, so then what's gone well, and it makes you think, and it is important, isn't it? Because like you say, you are focused on what can be improved rather than what's gone well all the time, and you do need to celebrate your wins, however big or small they are. So completely resonate with that. Talk to me about kind of what you do to kind of relax and unwind. You've got a huge role within a huge organization. You're one of the top, definitely in the top 10 largest trusts, what, top 5 maybe?
Yeah, we were top 4 before Manchester did its big merger, so I'm not quite sure what that does to us, but
So you're in one of the 5th largest NHS trusts, on the board, chief operating officer, so like you say, on a day-to-day basis, running the hospitals. You're multi-site, aren't you? So it's not even like you're looking after one. So what is it you do to relax and unwind and kind of give yourself that kind of mental breathing space, because work can be so consuming, right?
Yeah, sure it can. So I mentioned earlier, I did yoga last night, so I did a bit of yoga and recently a bit of paddleboarding. Prior to COVID, I have always played netball since I was at school. Love team sport, love the fact when you get on the court and you chase after the ball, you can't think about anything else. But haven't played since February now, so I'm hoping we get back to that soon. And then I have a real love for travelling, so whenever I can, you'll find me abroad in my annual leave. And I also really enjoy the theatre, so both watching it and a little bit in my spare time doing a bit of amateur stuff.
Amdram, do a bit of Amdram, do you?
Yeah.
There you go. That Mary and that preschool play.
Yeah, maybe that was
that shone through, didn't it? That main role. You didn't want to give up the lights. I can't remember what you said. I was going to talk to you about. This ain't good for the podcast, is it?
So I'll fill the space where you're thinking, Jack. So I should have been performing this summer in Minack. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's a theatre on the south coast, kind of cut out of the rock. My Derby Shakespeare company should have been performing Merry Wives of Windsor, and I was due to be one of those wives. So we've postponed it, and hopefully we're going to be there next August.
Fingers crossed. There you go. I remember what I was going to say. So you mentioned about being abroad, and I'm sure when we first spoke, you said that just before COVID you was abroad, and
so I think I managed to get one of the last holidays before COVID, and then I have also managed a trip to Croatia before it's just gone onto the quarantine list, but I was there a few weeks ago. So
happy days. So what was that like? Because it seems to be like obviously Paul, by the way, and obviously I spoke to him, and it seems like coups go on holiday just as like winter's ending, and you've had your 3 months of pressure and so on. What was that like though, coming back from holiday and going kind of straight into COVID?
Okay. Yeah, it was challenging. Interesting. I was in Sri Lanka, so it was starting to come east. And when I arrived into Sri Lanka, they were checking your temperature in the hotel, in the airport. There was leaflets about it. But actually, when I landed back at Heathrow 2 weeks later, there was still nothing in the UK. So that was sort of the first week of March, and then it was a few weeks later when we went into lockdown.
Yeah.
So I was kind of thinking about it while I was on holiday, because we kind of sensed that we weren't quite sure what it looked like, but we were sort of sensing that there was something coming. In parts, it was exhausting, of course it was, and in parts it was slightly overwhelming, and it was scary not to know what to do. There was so much unknown, and the guidance changing all the time. But actually, when I look back now, I have an incredible sense of pride for what the organisation achieved and what the NHS as a whole, and what our society achieved. The coming together of everybody through that period was incredible. The clinical teams here refashioned pathways and delivered care in new creative ways using digital technology that, frankly, we've been trying for about a decade to get some of these changes happening. We went from having over 200 medically safer transfer patients. That's patients that are really ready to go on to go to either another care environment or to go home with the right support. We went from having over 200 of those patients in the hospital to 30, and we've maintained that position between 30 and 40 since the peak of COVID. And so actually now I kind of find myself, when I'm reflecting on it, thinking about lots of the incredible things that we achieved.
Yeah. As things that need to stay now, right?
And how do we hold on to some of those improvements? How do we embed them and make them the way that we do things around here?
Yeah.
But mostly it was the people. Honestly, people left their families to come and live in university accommodations so that they could continue to care for our patients. They so many of them went absolutely the extra mile, and that makes me so proud and so humble to have been a really small part of that.
Yeah, no, incredible. Well, it's been lovely to interview you, and one that I've thoroughly enjoyed, and it's been brilliant to get to know the person behind the job title. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack.
Hi everybody, thanks so much for listening to that episode of the P&E podcast. If you like what you heard, please make sure that you share this episode via your social media channels, as it really does help us to gain traction in promoting this podcast series. Please make sure that you also subscribe to the channel that you're listening via, as you'll then get notifications as soon as we release our next podcast episode. Thank you.